The morning after the Passover Sabbath began like any other in the ancient world. The Judean hills were quiet, catching the first light of a normal Sunday. Inside Jerusalem, the mandatory holiday rest had ended. The massive city gates opened, merchants set up their stalls, and thousands of religious pilgrims began packing their belongings for the long journey home. To the general public, the recent crucifixion of a Galilean teacher named Jesus was already old news. It was a brief, violent spectacle, now buried under the immediate concerns of commerce and travel. The city went about its daily routine, oblivious to the fact that the immutable laws of human mortality had been broken just outside its walls. But away from the bustling streets, Jesus' closest followers were barricaded inside a dark room, terrified that the Roman soldiers who executed their leader were coming for them next. They were experiencing a complete vacuum of purpose. The man they believed would rescue Israel was dead, and with him their entire future had been extinguished. First-century Jews had no theological framework for a Messiah who dies on a cross, let alone one who rises from the dead. For these disciples, a crucifixion meant the story had reached a definitive, brutal end. While the men hid, a small group of women navigated the pre-dawn alleys. They carried heavy jars of spices to complete a practical, somber task, the final anointing of a decaying body. They were walking toward the grave out of profound grief and abnegation. They fully expected to find a corpse. As the women approached the burial site, they discussed a looming logistical problem. How were they going to bypass the massive physical barrier sealing the grave? Looking at this first-century tomb, we see the scale of that constraint. A heavy stone disc sat wedged tight inside a carved track. But when they arrived, the entrance stood wide open. The massive stone sat completely clear, rolled uphill and away. Stepping inside, they found a structured void. The body was missing, but the linen burial cloths were left behind, deliberately and neatly arranged. This scene defied the logic of a grave robbery. Thieves operating in the dark do not take the time to carefully unwrap a corpse and fold the grave clothes before fleeing. This pristine physical evidence shattered their logic and plunged the witnesses into intense confusion. Fleeing an encounter with blinding angelic figures inside the tomb, the women ran back to the men. In the Judean legal system, a woman's testimony carried zero weight in court, yet they were the sole bearers of this message. Hearing the report, Peter and John immediately took off, sprinting frantically through the waking city streets to verify the claim themselves. When they reached the site, John hesitated at the threshold, peering in cautiously. Peter pushed right past him, stepping directly into the burial space. Evaluating the undisturbed linens resting exactly where the body had been, Peter deduced the truth of the crime scene. The tomb hadn't been broken into. It had been overcome. But even with undeniable physical proof, the men returned home. They possessed the forensic evidence, but their minds still lacked the capacity to comprehend a resurrection. The focus then shifts back to the garden. Mary Magdalene stood completely alone outside the empty tomb, weeping into an abyss of grief. Assuming the figure approaching her was the gardener, she begged for the location of the body. He answered by speaking her name, Mary. In that instant, her paralyzing trauma and unbelief were transformed into undeniable reality. The empty tomb and the folded cloths provided the mystery, but the recognition of a living person provided the proof. From that garden, the shockwave expanded. Later that day, two sorrowful disciples walking the dusty road to Emmaus suddenly recognized Jesus the moment he broke bread at their table. That evening, Jesus appeared straight through the locked doors of the fearful 11. He offered the physical proof of his scarred hands and declared total peace over their panic. Inside that room, despair gave way to absolute victory. Outside, the oblivious markets of Jerusalem buzzed on, deaf to the celebration. History's pivot point occurred in the quiet pre-dawn, witnessed first by those in the deepest grief, rather than the crowds in the city. A resurrection of this scale is an event that forces a choice in the present. It stands as a historical claim that requires an answer. Look closely at the physical evidence and the sudden joy of these early eyewitnesses. Consider how this empty tomb answers your own doubts.